Today is January 17th. I'm coming to you from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles. If you are new, this is a show about Amazon, the Kindle, books, authors, technology. And if you're a longtime listener, you might have listened to about 597 shows before this one because we're at 598. My guest this week was recommended, as some of my best ideas for guests have been, by a listener. This was Tony Clark, emailed me just 5 days ago, and she said, "You've never interviewed Joanna Penn, have you? She's a lively, engaging speaker, an enthusiastic Kindle and Amazon supporter, and one of the great self-publishing success stories. She has an extremely lucrative business with numerous books to her credit, both fiction and nonfiction, and in my humble opinion, you and she are the two best podcasters on the planet." Well, I couldn't ignore a recommendation like that, so I reached out to Joanna, and although she is very busy with her successful business, and she's also a writer and a podcaster and runs the Creative Penn website, which is a terrific resource for writers, at first it didn't look like I was going to be able to schedule something this week, but she was eager to get together. We'd both been aware of each other's work for the last 10 years, and it was fun to finally have a chance to sit down and have a conversation by Skype. A couple of days ago, I reached her at her home in Bath in the UK and had a chance to just talk about all kinds of things. I really enjoyed it. And as you'll hear, my conversation with Joanna had some similarities to last week's chat with Catherine Esty, the author of 80-somethings. They each seem to be nudging me to new ideas of what my own personal path might look like, and that it may mean that I'm getting particularly inspiring guests of late, or that I'm ripe for some kind of a new trajectory, and kind of exciting, kind of scary at the same time. Joanna writes thrillers as J.F. Penn and nonfiction for writers as Joanna Penn. And as I said, her website, thecreativepenn.com, is an excellent resource. It was voted in the top 100 for writers by Writer's Digest. And her 30-plus books have sold more than 500,000 copies in 84 countries in 5 languages. Her podcast is kind of contemporaneous with mine in terms of when she started. Her first episode was March 15th, 2009. Mine was July 26th the previous year. And Alexa informs me that means that the Kindle Chronicles showed up 233 days before the Creative Penn podcast. But her show has some similarities to mine. Each episode has a guest, and she talks about topics of interest and has evolved in the 10 years that she's been doing the podcast. Hers shows up every Monday, and mine shows up every Friday. So if you're not familiar with her show, it could be a nice 1-2 punch. You listen to the Kindle Chronicles on Friday, and I would recommend adding the Creative Penn on Monday. With that, let's get to the interview. I began by asking what led to Joanna's writing of her latest book for authors, which is titled Audio for Authors, and it's available for pre-order and will be released in March.
Like you, I've been podcasting also since 2009. You were like a year before me. And so I've been listening to podcasts and doing audio for that long. And what obviously podcasting took off in 2015, as you know, really went mainstream. But then I went to Podcast Movement last year in 2019, and it seemed that podcasting has also gone mainstream for business, but they also report, so the money in ads and things, but also they were sort of talking about the more creative side, about podcast fiction. There were loads of wonderful podcast fiction people there. And I had started listening to podcast fiction again a decade ago, but it seems like it's gone so mainstream. Also, they announced, I'm sure you've seen the reports, 50% of US listeners over 12, people over 12 have now listened to a podcast Google has started indexing podcast episodes. So what happened in 2019 was this kind of tipping point for podcasting. Then with audiobooks, again, we've seen audiobooks are the fastest growing segment in publishing. I've certainly seen my own revenue from audiobooks continue to go up every month. And last year, I also had voice coaching to do my own narration for my own book. So I do my own nonfiction. I've done some of my short stories, and I was also getting more questions. And this is the thing, as as other people get into it, they start asking questions. So whereas it used to be that authors would ask me about book marketing or how to self-publish a book or whatever, now they were asking, how do I start a podcast? How do I record my own audiobooks? So what happened was this kind of tipping point for me in 2019 where I realized that I actually know quite a lot about this, having been doing it for so long. So why not? And I was answering the same questions over and over again. So I started writing the book, and I found, to my surprise, it was actually quite a big book. And then also I've been getting well into AI, artificial intelligence, and the voice technology side. I don't know if you've been doing this, but Descript.com, I'm in their beta. So I have a voice. Descript.com is, they bought Lyrebird, which is a voice synthesis company, and they also do AI transcription and editing of podcasts. So I'm in their beta, so I actually have a voice double, and the development, I've got some samples at thecreativepenn.com/voice double if people are interested. So what they do is they read in your voice and create a synthesis of your voice. So you can just,
Does it sound like you, or?
Yeah, yes, it does. It sounds scarily like me. But of course, the more data they have, the better the voice synth. So I'm sure you've heard, and the listeners have heard about deep fakes. So again, 2019 deep fake technology kind of hit this tipping point again. So I was like, right, I need to get in on this. I need to license my voice for other people to use in whatever they're going to use it in. So I just became more and more interested in the AI licensing, AI copyright, how we're going to do audio rights in the future. For example, say people are listening, there's your voice, which they listen to regularly, so they know your voice. What if somebody wants to listen to an audiobook with you reading it to them instead of Samuel L. Jackson, for example?
That would be a wise choice, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe they like my voice. Right. Maybe they want British middle-aged female. So why can't they just click a button on their audiobook app and change the voice? Because so many audiobooks are narrated in the same voice, the same kind of American male voice. What if I want a different voice? So I think we're on the cusp of an explosion in audio creativity, audio rights, licensing, all kinds of interesting things for creators. So I guess that's a bit of a long answer, but we're at an exciting moment in audio history.
You mentioned podcast fiction. I'm not really sure I know what that is. These are people who are putting up podcasts and they sound like short stories or novels, or what is that genre?
This is a great question because it's everything. It's all kinds of things. It's essentially, instead of a story being sold as a book, it might be a book put out in chapters, but each chapter is a podcast episode. It might be something like Welcome to Night Vale, which is a small town radio station where all the conspiracy theories happen. And the podcast episode is, people like us talking about what's going on in the town, but it's made up. There's, full cast productions with lots of different voices. But the point is there's people writing directly for audio, like there have been BBC dramas and radio dramas for many, many years. Now people are writing for podcast storytelling. So it's almost it's a renaissance in audio.
Well, and it really puts the author in a different place. I've been to Digital Book World a couple of times. I think you will. The new one with Bradley Metrock and all. He's such an evangelist for, this is the age of voice. And I think he's right. But I have to say that as a more literary person, there's something sacred about the words on the paper. And that's what really writing is. And that's what an author does. And though I've had all kinds of satisfaction in my podcast, and now I'm doing a flash briefing for Alexa and different things, the voice. But do you ever wrestle with, and your own roots are kind of in more the literary tradition, is it a challenge to broaden our view of what literature is and what serious writing is, so that some of it is actually voice first and it's never actually on the page?
Well, there's so many answers to this. I love this topic. So first of all, when you say serious writing, and I know you've got an MFA in poetry, right?
Right.
Poetry is meant to be performed. It really is. It's meant to be spoken.
Yeah.
And if you think that the earliest literature is meant to be spoken, most people were not literate. So that's one point.
Yeah, exactly.
We've always had an oral history. So we're moving back into this oral culture. So that's one thing. I think you can have serious oral
like
literature.
Homer.
Yes. The second point would be, or even performance poets now. I actually consume a lot more poetry by audio because I can listen to performance poets on my own time and not wait until they do one evening sometime. So that's amazing. And poetry is having a huge renaissance. I mean, Ingram Spark sells a ton of print on demand poetry books now, which is great. So that's one thing. Second thing, audio and voice work is often written first. I mean, how often? I mean, you and I are having a extemporaneous conversation, but you sent me questions and I have thought about those questions and I've written some notes. And so when I read an audiobook or when an actor does a part in a podcast fiction, they are reading from written words. So if you have a stage play, it's a written word that is then performed. So and I have screenplays that I'm going to turn into voice sort of more audio drama, because there's more of a market for audio drama and it's so much cheaper to produce. So that's another thing. It all starts with the written word and it might end up in voice, or even you and I talking, we could turn this into a transcript. Yes. So we could turn audio into text. So I believe that where we're going is a ubiquitous audio world where everything in text will also be in audio and everything in audio will also be in text. Because of AI, we'll be able to do it much cheaper. But the other thing is, I found that writing with audio in mind has made my writing better. So even if you think about dialogue, if you write dialogue in a novel, it can be stilted if you only type it. But if you speak it, you will realize immediately that it's got some issues. Now, of course, we don't read dialogue as we might listen to dialogue, but it's incredible how much more sensitive you are to sound. So repeated sounds sound different to repeated words. So the word you, Y-O-U, and interview, but begin and end with this different words. So on a page, you might not notice them, but when you hear them, they sound similar. They touch the same audio note. The same with the word said. Everyone says when you write a novel, you should just use said, Len said.
Not smiled.
Joe said. And not use other words. But in an audio version, that just sounds terrible. It disappears when you read it, but when you listen to it, it sounds terrible. So the author has to be more creative, not to use, the different words, but to use action, for example, instead of just dialogue tags all the time. So I think that writing for voice can challenge you creatively and make you think about writing in a different way. And then finally, I just have to say, if you're not doing this, you are missing out on a massive market. Yeah.
Well, and that gets to, I think you say in the description of your new book, you're talking about the next shift in reader behavior. And what you're saying certainly would point toward the fact that the people that we're writing for, their behavior is changing. They're expecting new ways to encounter stories. But can you say a little bit more about that? What's the reader behavior that you're seeing and expecting to define the future?
I know I'm one person, but I'm a hell of a book buyer. I'm one of those readers. I probably like you. I buy 3 to 5 books a week, or I buy more books and I don't get to read them all. But I am listening constantly to content. So I walk a lot. We don't have a car. So when I'm walking, I'm listening to a podcast or an audiobook. Yeah. And this will freak some people out, but I listen on 1.5 speed because normal speed is too slow. So it's not, people say, oh, but I can read much faster than I can listen. But I have a friend who's blind, and the speed that he listens at is incredible. It's just another input into our incredible brains, right? So what I've seen in my own behavior, I was 99% Kindle reader, and now I only read fiction on my Kindle, and I listen to non-fiction audiobooks, and I will buy hardback nonfiction to go alongside the audiobook. Now, this behavior is interesting for publishers because I'm spending more money per book. Now I'm buying an audio edition and I'm buying a hardback because I want to keep that on my shelf. For fiction, I'm still on my Kindle. I'm, 100% fiction on my Kindle, which I have been for, nearly a decade. So, but my behavior there, and I do listen to some fiction on Kindle, but it's often, have you read World War Z by Max Brooks? No. Okay. Well, the film with Brad Pitt is a mainstream version, but the book World War Z is an incredible book. It's literary horror, what I would call literary horror, but it's written. Every single chapter is written from a different point of view. It's an oral history of the zombie war, basically. And what they've done with the audiobook is every chapter is read by a different voice. And it makes it an incredibly different experience as an audiobook. So I've read that on Kindle, I've bought that on audiobook. So this is a huge shift in behavior, right? I'm buying in multiple editions. I'm listening to nonfiction instead of buying the ebook. So my purchasing has shifted. I'm on a subscription service. So people are either on Audible or their Storytel is the massive one that's outside of Audible. Then we've got markets. I think Sweden or Norway is audio first. So the number of audiobooks sold is greater than the ebooks sold. The same in the UK. I think the Independent said that audiobooks would overtake ebook sales in the UK next year. Wow. That might be because we've seen KU, Kindle Unlimited, so they're not registering sales, borrows as sales. But what we're seeing is a shift in behavior to how do I read more as an avid reader, but how do I fit that into my life? So when I'm cooking, I'm doing that. And interestingly, my husband behaves completely differently. He only listens to fiction on audiobook, and he buys those massive 40-hour fantasy series, and he will buy every single one of them. So he'll buy like 10 Stephen Erikson 40 hours, and he'll spend the next 2 months listening to that at every moment around the house.
Now, is he reading nonfiction on Kindle or paper, or is it just the reverse of what you're doing?
He reads nonfiction on Kindle and also paper as well. We buy a lot of books. We're Amazon Prime. We spend a lot of money on books in all different formats. But it's notable that we both spend a lot of time listening now to audiobooks.
It sounds like a preference of nonfiction paper versus audio and fiction paper versus audio. You and your husband are just the reverse of each other. And do you think that your brains are wired differently, or what might account for one person feeling more comfortable reading their fiction with their eyes on a Kindle or a page and listening to the nonfiction content, whereas another person it might be just reverse? Why are people making those choices as to how they consume one type of writing versus the other?
I think it's about your intent. And this is another important thing about the voice first world, which Bradley talks about. Voice search, for example, search intent, and that is important. So my intent generally in listening to nonfiction is education. I'm just, a learning junkie. I'm always trying to learn something new. And that's why I listen to podcasts as well. So, and if I hear a podcast with someone interesting and I want their book, I will generally go check if there's an audiobook and put it on my wish list just in the app. So if it's not there, they're going to miss out on an potentially immediate sale. Whereas my husband, I think, listens for relaxation. So, if when we go to bed, I'll be reading on my Kindle and he'll be listening to fantasy. So it's almost lovely different behavior based on the intent of the user. Yeah. And I think that's what we're seeing. And I've said to many people, nonfiction, and I don't mind if a nonfiction book is 3 hours, but he won't buy one unless it's 30, 40 hours because you get that credit, on Audible. So a 30, 40 hour book is incredible value for one credit. Mm-hmm. Whereas I'm like, well, I don't care because I just want that information, even if there's just one chapter or something in that book. But the other thing I was going to say to you, interestingly, is my husband will also shop on something like BookBub. So, BookBub sends out the email blasts and there might be a 99-cent ebook deal on a Stephen Erikson, for example. So he will buy the ebook and get the audiobook for the cheaper price. So what's interesting is and I do it too, I buy ebooks in order to get cheaper audiobooks. And there's a thing called Amazon Matchmaker. So people can go into their Amazon profile, look for Amazon Matchmaker, and it will tell you what audiobooks you can get to match the ebooks you already have.
Oh. And you can get the lower price on the audiobook, and it wouldn't count as one of your credits that you've been earning month by month.
Exactly. Or you might wait for a special deal. So because Audible, you can't set the price as a publisher, it sets it automatically. If the ebook price changes, it may be that the audiobook price will change. So I might be able to get an ebook for 99 cents, and then I might be able to get the audiobook for $2.99. So I've spent $3.99 on the audiobook instead of a $9.99 credit, for example. So this is the interesting change in behavior. Who would have thought that we would be behaving like this? So this audio market, I want people to think of as, it's not exclusive. It's not, I listen to audiobooks so I don't read books or paperback or hardback or ebook. I do all of it.
Exactly. Well, the other thing is I look forward to talking with you. We do sort of overlap. You've been at this about a decade, and in that period, you've been writing your own work, your fiction and then your nonfiction, but you've really been helping authors take advantage of this new revolution in self-publishing that Amazon kicked off with Kindle and KDP. And if you think back over the past decade and the opportunities for writers to get into self-publishing versus where we are now, are there a couple of changes in the kinds of help you give authors to navigate this world versus 10 years ago when it was starting, or surprises that you've seen and actually sort of lived as you followed the space for the purpose of helping other people? What are the milestones or the landmarks that you see when you look back over that decade?
Well, I mean, first of all, I should say when I started the creativepenn.com, I was just sharing my journey. I'd been ripped off, by some scammy publishers, and I wanted to share my lessons learned so that other people wouldn't get caught. And it's turned into something unexpected, as I'm sure Kindle Chronicles has. You start out with just wanting to help people, and then it turns into a business. But what I've seen, I think, well, the first thing is that when I first started, self-publishing there was the stigma. Some people think there still is, but I think those people have not realized what's going on. I feel like now we're part of the maker movement, which is much broader than writing. It's in everything, it's in robots, it's in indie film, it's in indie music. It's, being indie, being a creative independent is actually a trendy thing. It's like we've gone from being the pariahs to being sort of what people want to be. They want to be independent. So that's a really interesting shift. And that has led to, pride, being a proud indie. There was a time, I'm sure you remember, it's like 5-6 years ago when it was traditional publishing versus self-publishing, who's going to win? And it's like, no, that's not the way it works. And there's a lot now, most indies are hybrid. So, I have book deals in different languages and, lots of different things that we do that involve other publishers. Also the level of professionalism. So again, when I started, I did, my own covers and, you pay your mum to do edits. Hugh Howey, famously, his mum edited his book, right? And edited Wool, and look what happened to that. So we've gone from this kind of amateur movement with some very good writers for sure, but now to be successful in indie, you have to have incredible covers, you have to have top level editing, you have to know your marketing, you have to be better than traditional publishing. And luckily, because we can move so much faster, that is possible. So that's definitely changed. I think at the beginning, of course, Mark Coco with Smashwords was originally the only person who included international authors. So Amazon was not open to international authors at the beginning. I think it was 2009 they opened up to outside of the US.
This was, you mean KDP was not open to international authors? Oh.
Yeah. So originally it was only US authors could publish. And of course, even now, things like ACX for audiobooks are only open to 4 countries. And still, you can't publish on Amazon as a citizen of any country. So Smashwords, then Draft to Digital, Publish Drive, what we've had, and then Kobo, Writing Life. We've had a number of companies come in and say, hey, this isn't just about America. Right. And I think that's another really important shift. Obviously America is still the biggest market, but it's not going to be in the next couple of years. And that is what I've always built my business on. Obviously, I'm British, but I lived in Australia. My family's, Canadian, Nigerian, Hungarian, New Zealander. So we're very international. And my drive has always been, how do we do this as non-US authors? How do we, make money from selling books to Americans, but also how do we work in our own markets, but also in other global markets? So I think that's important. Also, KU, Kindle Unlimited, and KDP Select from the publishing side has become a game changer for many people. Some people have made huge amounts of money. Other people have not. And what's interesting is that has become the biggest split in the independent author movement, is between wide and exclusive to Amazon. Of course, it's per book, so you don't have to do all or nothing. It's per book. And then the final thing is the rise of paid advertising. So it used to be that you could publish a book on Amazon and you would sell some copies because they had organic reach. But now it's pay to play, and has been since sort of end of 2018. In order for people to find you in the Amazon store, you have to do paid advertising. But what Amazon have done is open up advertising to independent authors. So we now have 6 countries on our advertising dashboard within KDP. So that's another huge change that has gone hand in hand with the need for professionalism.
So that pay to play, I'm not aware of that development. I have always thought that, compared with a physical bookstore where publishers could pay to have their books show up on the front tables, and that always struck me as, I don't really like that so much. I like the idea that I walk into a bookstore and whoever's smart in running that bookstore is choosing the best books that they think I'll like, not which publisher paid them to put them there. And I always thought Amazon was different, that they were putting the books in front of me they most thought I would like to read based on my purchasing behavior or whatever. But are you saying that now Amazon is becoming more like that traditional bookstore model, where what I'm seeing is affected by who has paid for ads to put things in front of me?
So I know you have a thing saying that you're a shareholder, right, of Amazon?
Yes.
As am I. I'm also a shareholder. And what you have to think as a shareholder is Amazon makes money. Forget the books for a minute. Amazon makes money, and they are going up against Google and Facebook to be number one in advertising revenue. Mm-hmm. So if you think about advertising revenue as a different business model to selling stuff and taking a percentage of stuff. So think about it from Amazon's perspective. If we can first of all take 30% from an author for revenue per book, but they'll also spend some of that other 70% on advertising. Why wouldn't we do that? Or why wouldn't we get everyone who tries to sell stuff on Amazon to also pay for ads? So from the Amazon perspective, you can absolutely see what they're doing, and the fact that Google and Facebook also have massive advertising revenue. So I know you do a lot of research. If you research that, you'll see that Amazon is the fastest growing advertising platform. So then coming onto the books, I totally agree with you. And my experience as a user has completely fallen off a cliff since Amazon have made this change. But if you go into Amazon and type in, let's say, how to market a book, which is one of my book titles, you will probably get other books before mine that are sponsored ads for those keywords. So whatever you type into Amazon now, people listening, have a look at the sponsored products, and then on a book page underneath, there used to be, and there still is sometimes because they do split testing, it will be people who bought this also bought, or it will say sponsored products. So what's happened in a lot of cases is sponsored products have replaced the also boughts, and this change happened in around September 2018, and then it became people's incomes fell off a cliff, like 50% income drop over the month that happened. And so it was like, oh, what's happened? Oh, right, we need to buy ads. So that is the change that has happened quite recently. And what I think is traditional publishers might not have realized this yet, and this is going to have a big impact on the book market.
Well, as a customer, what I've seen the sponsored stuff, and it's in all categories. And my habit when I use Amazon is I just skip the sponsored stuff. I figure these are people that are putting their stuff in front of me by paying for it. But is it still true that if I skip the sponsored stuff and I go to just whatever search results I've been looking for, that's still sort of pure, developed by the algorithm?
Well, this is the thing. They change this stuff all the time. So I would just be a bit more aware of what's there and see how much paid product that is. And you'll often see on the right-hand side, there'll be a paid ad spot. In the middle, there might be a paid ad spot. Then there's a whole list, of them underneath. And then there might be some organic stuff, or there might not be. So this is a big change in book marketing. But you've got to think that Facebook made this change 3 or 4 years ago. You used to have organic reach on Facebook, and then you didn't. Google, put algorithm changes through. This is business. Yeah. I know you've got Harvard Business School you went to, so you understand business.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So what we have this encroaching of the sponsored stuff is going to take up more and more space. I would hope there's always going to be a chance for a smart shopper like me to just still find the organic stuff. But you're saying once on some books there wouldn't even, once some search results, there might not even be any organic results.
Well, you'll have to see. Yeah. I mean, it obviously changes all the time. What I would say is my search behavior has changed in that I am looking for. This is why perhaps my nonfiction book buying is now based on podcasts. So I listen to so many podcasts, and will hear an interesting person, and I will check out their book. So I get most of my recommendations for nonfiction through podcasts, and for fiction, I don't even know. Probably awards. I look at a lot of awards. I go to a lot of conferences, stuff like that, social media. But I used to only shop on that Kindle front page, within the categories, and now I find myself not doing that at all. And in fact, I have found myself going into bookstores to see what they have curated. So that's a positive for the publishing industry. So things are definitely changing.
I should be more. You're telling me something I need to learn more about. That's really fascinating.
Oh, well, I'll tell you something that's also interesting. I know we're not going to talk politics, but one of the political things that might happen in the US is the discussion of if you own the store, you can't play in the store, which some candidates are talking about. And also the incumbent candidate also doesn't have a great love for Amazon, as we know. So there is a potential that the advertising side, I mean, if you think about it, if you own the store, how can you also own the advertising and the products and everything? So there may be some kind of breakup of business models at some point. So I think that might be one of the big things we see in the next decade is how will these businesses be controlled by government or broken up by government in order to get rid of what some people have big words for, not monopoly, one of those other words.
No, I think that's true. The regulation of big tech is certain because, anyway, I don't want to get. I just came from a political event, so I have to get my mind.
Wind it back. But I wanted to mention it because I think that could have a big impact on the next decade.
Yeah, and I think that's something which crosses left-right lines on candidates too. It's just something that's in front of us that needs to be addressed. Well, you mentioned the word awards, and one of the things that I was most interested in when I was getting familiar with your work is your honest statement that you aspire to win a major literary award. And you've got a nice trope where you say you are an award-nominated author because you did get nominated. What was that award that you got nominated for?
It was the International Thriller Writers, which is the top thriller writing organization, best ebook original for my thriller Destroyer of Worlds. And the ITW is open to independent authors who have sold a certain number of copies. So I went through the hoops to join the organization. And so I was really happy with that. And my fellow hybrid author, James Scott Bell, I'm sure you know Jim. No, you don't. Oh, James Scott Bell, he writes legal thrillers, but he's also, he writes a lot for Writer's Digest and a lot of craft courses. But yeah, Jim won, and I was, thrilled for him, obviously. But it's important for me because I know, like you, I'm a business person. I know how to make money at this game, and I run a very successful business. But I would like to stand alongside my peers in the craft area. And I know you can have a successful writing life all your life without winning an award. Many authors do, and you can't guarantee you're going to win an award. That's the thing. Yeah. But I feel like also as an independent author, you judge your achievement by how much money you make, for example, or your reader reviews, or how many people are on your email list, or what events you speak at, or what podcasts you get asked on, but you don't get the traditional recognition that traditionally published authors may get, even if they've sold a tiny percentage of the book sales that indies have done. And of course, romance writers, for example, have come up against this for many years, sold hundreds of millions of books, and then somebody sold 200 copies and wins an award because they're traditionally published in a literary genre. So yeah, those are some of the reasons it's important to me. But at the end of the day, wanting to win a prize to me is becoming the type of writer who can win a prize. I may do it. I'm 45, so let's give me 45 years to get to that goal, and I'll be a hell of a writer by then.
Exactly. It's a good aspiration. It's motivating. It strikes me that, because is it true that like the major literary prizes, what's the Booker or the National Book Award, all of these, can you win any of those awards if you're an indie writer?
No, you can't even enter most awards. The reason ITW and things like SIFWA, the science fiction writers, the genre fiction areas, so Horror Writers Association, I'm also a member of, they now are open to independent authors, and also their awards you don't have to pay to enter. The truth about a lot of literary awards, of course, is you have to pay to enter, or at least agree that you will pay. So the Booker, for example, if you are shortlisted, you agree to pay £5,000 as part of marketing. If you win, you have to pay £10,000. So there are different levels of acceptance in the industry. The Alliance of Independent Authors has an Open Up to Indies campaign, which is trying to get more awards to open up to independents. And, I can understand both sides, but the reality is that a lot of literary authors do very well self-publishing and also write some fantastic books. So there shouldn't be any reason that these things are not open. But there you go.
It seems like the traditional publishers successfully marginalized self-published authors by calling it was vanity press. It seems like the last lever the Big Five have is this prestige aspect, that to the extent they control access to the awards and all of that, they may lose in the battle for readers and everything else. But I guess it kind of irritates me to see that the only remaining grasp they have on the throat of readers and writers is the ability to say, you're good and that one isn't good.
Yeah, but also it's funny because you said prestige. Another word might be vanity. Yeah. So now,
who's the vanity press now? Okay, let's start a movement in that direction.
But that's what's so funny, but I mean, I feel it. That hence the award thing is, yes, I can run a successful business, but if I go to a literary event in the UK, if I don't have Random House or Penguin or whatever, they're like, oh. Yeah. Like whatever. So it's very interesting that and of course writers are riddled with self-doubt, and so this is a constant pressure for people.
Oh, well, that's something. Well, as usual, I prepared many more questions than we have time to. The one thing that I would like to sort of end with, your story is striking because at the age of 32, you ask yourself, what are you doing with your life? You had a successful career in financial area, and you made this change, very well timed because there were so many new opportunities in book publishing. And you mentioned you're 45 now. It's been more than 10 years since that sort of portal in your life to something very new. And I'm 69. I've been doing the podcast for 10 years. Every once in a while, I hated to see you say at one point, I wonder if I should stop doing this podcast, because every once in a while that thought comes to my head, and I'll be a week like this week when I don't have a guest lined up and it's Wednesday. And so it's when something's been this satisfying and successful, to actually let go of it. And actually, I blame you for sort of being haunted by a potential new portal. I've got a lot of why couldn't I write a novel? And I started taking your course. I started doing the first things and all these great questions. And I told my wife, I said, I'm thinking I might want to write a novel. And it's like what a ridiculous idea. I mean, first of all, I'm not going to get to live 45 more years like you will to get good enough to have a novel. But this is a long way of saying, are you feeling, are you crying at all during these days with all that you have on your plate? And is there anything beckoning you forward in a way that could possibly mirror what you did more than a decade ago?
Well, first of all, you should write that novel.
Stop it.
Because everyone has a novel in them. And you will have an issue because of your MFA and because of your literary background. That is the biggest thing that stops people writing. That stopped me for a long time until Dan Brown came along. And I was like, hell, you can just write a book like that.
Yeah.
But yes, on the thinking, I do think, a lot about should I carry on, especially, the podcast, as you say, it's like some weeks it's like, oh my goodness. But Patreon is a big thing. Do you have a Patreon? If people don't know, it's where people can support a podcaster or any other creative, and people join my Patreon every single day, and they want the podcast to carry on. They don't have to pay for it, but they throw in a couple of dollars a month. Some people throw in $50 a month just because they want me to carry on. And so I'm like, okay, I'm still serving a purpose, and we all love to serve a purpose, right? That's part of why we live, is to help other people. So it is a purpose for me, and I have a community who are still learning, and I'm still learning, and I have become a lot more honest on the show. Like, I would just talk about what I'm interested in, and like you do, ask the questions that I want to know. I'm not always thinking about the audience, but so I don't see an end yet for the Creative Penn. There's still a lot more. I've just done a survey, so I'm going to go through that survey, and that will give me lots more. How can I serve people? But then also I've started Books and Travel, which is the Books and Travel podcast, because my biggest loves are books, reading and writing, and also travel. So I'm interviewing people about the places that inspire their work, which also will help market my own fiction, which is all based on my travels, and also makes tax-deductible travel. Woohoo!
Nice.
So and in that area, I think I'm going to write more under JF Penn, which is my fiction. So I've written 18 novels or something, but I'm going to write travel memoir. I'm going to write, I've got this idea for the shadow book, which is about the shadow side of our personalities, where we write from the darkness, and that comes through in our fiction, our non-fiction, our poetry. And I will also do retreats and do actual travel tours. For example, I live in Bath in the southwest of England, which is quite famous. And, so I'm thinking about ways of using my creative energy to do more projects that fulfill other sides of me rather than just chucking it all in.
What would a retreat be? Would it be for authors, or what's your vision of the retreats?
Yeah, well, I think it would be I've done a lot of retreats over the years as a speaker. I'm a professional speaker. So, for example, I spoke in Bali at a yoga retreat. So we did yoga in the morning in the jungle, and then I taught in the afternoon. And I'm actually starting to do more of those, being asked to speak at more of those, which are multi-day experiences as opposed to just go, do a keynote, leave, which I think people are getting tired of in many ways, So here in Bath, I do a lot of walking on the canal system. So it might maybe we'll do some writing, we do some hiking, have a look around Bath, do a bit of tourism. So I don't know yet, but when you asked kind of about the next shift, so I bought the URL booksandtravel.tours. And also, see, I could do that all over the world, right? I could come to America and do like a tour that touches on books and things that have been written. So I will always involve books and writing, but there may be, or even in augmented reality, for example, I might record things that you could wear. I could walk next to you as you walk along South Bank in London, and I could give you a tour, but I'm in augmented reality. So I'm thinking about all that kind of thing in the future, but certainly more experiences. We haven't even touched on AI really, but I think that a lot of stuff is going to be impacted by AI, but what will not be is the one-on-one personality stuff, the experiences that people crave in a digital world, and voice. So that's another reason, circling back to voice, why I'm making sure I have a voice brand out there. So yeah, I definitely, but by the time I get to do all this, you better have started that novel.
All right. So I may have to come on a retreat to get the juice to start the novel.
Get it going.
I should have never brought that up. Well, this has been delightful. I have been speaking with Joanna Penn, founder of the CreativePenn.com. Her next book, Audio for Authors, is available for pre-order from Curl Up Press with release on March 6th, 2020. Thanks very much, Joanna.
Thanks so much for having me, Len.
Great fun. You heard me mention a course from Joanna that had prompted my idea of writing a novel. It turns out that what I am signed up for is not one of her actual full writing courses, which does include one titled How to Write a Novel from Idea to Book, and it costs $297 or $50 per month for 6 months. It's a self-paced course, and I may well try it. For now, I am learning a lot from a free offering, which she calls the Author 2.0 Blueprint. And it was updated this month, and it includes an 85-page PDF guide and a series of emails and videos that will arrive over the coming weeks, along with an email newsletter of industry news and tips. It's a lot of content, very well done, and it's free just for the signing up. But I'll have a link to where you could sign up to that at the show notes page, thekindlechronicles.com. As a follow-up to last week's conversation with Catherine Esty, I stopped by her apartment today when I was out having lunch with Dad, and I helped her to learn how to do highlights on her Kindle and then to send them by email so that she could print them out. And she thought that was pretty cool, that this is something that she might be able to use for the book group that she's in at the retirement community where they live. And she also said that she had lost her calendar, which is on paper, and I said, gosh, you really ought to get that into a digital format on your iPhone. And we talked about lots of other things as well. I really enjoyed having a chance to just get together with her without a microphone, and I have a feeling that when I'm out visiting my dad, I'm frequently going to be able to stop by and help Catherine with some of her digital life and just learn a little bit more about her enthusiastic embrace of the 80s, which I found very compelling and really motivating, just really fun. So this has been a great couple of weeks for me in terms of the quality of the conversations I've had. I have an idea for next week, which I haven't quite nailed down yet, but it turns out that the Staples store, which is based here in Boston, and it's an office product store that's undergoing a dramatic transformation into a kind of shared working space and podcast studios that they plan to put in all of their stores eventually. The one that's right near us here in Cambridge is quite impressive. It's got 4 high-quality Rode microphones, and it's going to be available for people to record shows in. I hope I'm going to be able to speak with Stacy, the woman I met at a reception last night, who has been in charge of this new business for Staples. And the idea is that we'll be in the Staples studio. You'll get to hear the quality of the recording, and we'll find out from her why this significant office product store thinks that podcasting is such a good growth market that it really fits in with their new vision for their entire chain of stores. So she's very busy because of this rollout, and might not actually be able to get on the calendar next week, but we're going to give it a try. That's it for the Kindle Chronicles. Thanks for joining me. Hope you have a great week, and happy reading.